Here's the next question.
Just ask the Minister of Finance to report on the appointment of Goldman Sachs as advisers on the sale of the state share in AIB, to make a statement on why Goldman Sachs were chosen and on his views on the sale of shares in the banks.
Thank you very much, Deputy. As the Deputy will be aware, the Irish banking system is now in a much stronger position than it has been in recent years. Profits are recovering, balance sheets have been restructured, and we have started the process of returning cash to the taxpayer following the huge investment that were made over the 2009-2011 period. Much of the banking-related work in the Department of Finance this year will focus on AIB. Given the scale of the state's investment, some $20.8 billion, and the range of options available to recoup value from the bank, officials within my department are working with AIB on reconfiguring its capital structure. Goldman Sachs International have been appointed to provide financial advice to the department in this regard. The appointment follows the establishment by the department last year of 3 separate panels of financial advisers. These panels were put in place to facilitate the provision of timely advice in relation to our banking investments. The panels are available for the wider department to use in other areas if deemed necessary. The award of the current contract followed a competitive tendering process with each of the 11 firms on panel 1, which covers capital markets, strategic M&A and restructuring advice, being invited to submit a tender. Prior to the year end, each of the firms accepted the invitation, and the tendering process included face-to-face presentations by each of the firms to a panel of Department of Finance officials. Arising from these presentations, each of the firms was scored across a number of standard criteria, with Goldman Sachs International being adjudged to have achieved the highest aggregate score. Accordingly, they were awarded the contract. The focus will be on ensuring that the best decisions are made regarding potential capital restructuring options and sequencing in order to maximise the return of cash to the state from our AIB investments over time. While this is just the start of the process, it is an essential first step on the road to recovering value for the taxpayer. All options remain on the table, and it is too early to specify what steps will be taken to put a timeline on decisions. As I previously stated on numerous occasions, government policy is that we will not remain a holder of our banking investments in the long term. Given our high debt to GDP ratio, we do not have the luxury of holding all of these investments indefinitely, and I envisage receipts from the gradual sale of these investments helping to play their part in reducing the state's overall debt burden in the coming years.
Come on, Deputy Paul Murphy.
I've asked the Minister why does he think that Goldman Sachs has agreed to do it on a pro bono basis, together, I think, with 5 of the other 11 on the panel that you mentioned. Was it just because they're nice guys, they're kind, want to help us out? Bearing in mind that an article in the Rolling Stone accurately described them, in my opinion, as a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, relentlessly jamming its blood funnel into anything that smells like money. Could this perhaps smell like money? Is there not a clear conflict of interest, given the fact that Goldman Sachs advises so many investors that at a later stage may be looking to buy bank shares? Is it because it will gain access to confidential information that it can later use for its own financial advantage? Is there no conflict of interest here that is very, very blatant, given the previous history of Goldman Sachs, including being found guilty of defrauding investors in the US, its role in terms of the Greek debt crisis? That really, why would you trust this company to do this without seeking its own return?
Thank you, Minister.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the weight Rolling Stone magazine should be attributed in terms of being a financial advisor. Myself, if it was me, I'd ring Mick Jagger rather than read the magazine if I was looking for financial advice. The position is that we anticipated a year ago that we would have a need for advice, and 3 panels were put together of possible advisors with different areas of expertise. And the panel from which we were getting advice to restructure AIB had 11 advisory groups on it, including Goldman Sachs. All 11 of them tendered, and there was an objective selection process And to Goldman Sachs, on the aggregate score, we're marginally first. I had no involvement in it whatsoever. I was simply told the result of the competition, and I agreed to the proposal that Goldman Sachs, because they had come out of the competition, should be the winners. Now, of the 11, five of the people who tendered, or 5 of the groups that tendered, offered to do the work for nothing. Now, the reason they do this, and it's common practice seemingly, especially in London, in the City of London, that finance houses like Goldman Sachs feel that their reputation is enhanced for other work if they're the advisors to sovereign governments for key, for key pieces of work. And an IPO for AIB, even selling 25% of it, would be one of the biggest IPOs ever in the London stock market. So obviously there'll be great attention paid to who the advisors are. Now, there's no commitment that at the point of sale that Goldman Sachs will get any additional work. There'll be a separate tendering process for the advisors that are required here. They're retained to advise on the restructuring of the bank, and when that piece of work is finished, any new work will have to be retendered.
Thank you. Deputy Murphy.
Just respectfully that it's either naive or disingenuous to consider that really they're just interested in the high visibility work, that it doesn't enter their minds that future clients will say, OK, Goldman Sachs did see the inside of AIB, and perhaps that will encourage people to go to Goldman Sachs rather than another firm in the future. On another aspect of this, I mean, is this an admission that you're giving up on the retrospective recapitalisation of the banks? You came in here on numerous occasions and said, once the SSM is set up, then we can go and apply. We still haven't applied for that, and that this would seem to be an admission. It's an act that seems to do it. You have government sources being reported as saying that Ireland now has little or no chance of ever recouping the billions of euro pumped into rescuing our banks from Europe. And is this not the wrong moment to make that admission and to accept that defeat, particularly in the context of the previous questions around the election of Syriza, the change that that makes in terms of the European picture, the possibility of a European debt conference? Surely now is not the moment to be selling to private investors, losing state control over a key bank, and instead to seek retrospective recapitalisation.
Yes, I've answered this question on innumerable occasions. The policy position of this government is that we don't intend holding the banks, and in particular AIB, in public ownership indefinitely. But indefinitely stretches out a long way. I've been advised by my Swedish colleague that their banking crisis in the early 90s, that the last of the shares held by the Swedish government in their banking system was only disposed of at the second half of last year. That was, 20-something years after the event. So we're not talking about a sudden sale or fire sales or anything like that, but we're talking about getting the bank in order and getting its book in order so that it's structured in a way that it's saleable, and then we'll consider best advice on what quantum we'll put on the market. It doesn't mean that we have abandoned the idea of a retrospective or retroactive recapitalisation. You see, whether we sell on the market or whether we sell to the ESM, the same initial mechanism is involved. They give us money for shares. And whether it's the market or whether it's the ESM, it's an exchange of money for shares.
Thank you, Minister.
And I'm totally non-ideological on this. We'll give the shares to the people who give us the most money. And at the minute, it looks as if the market is disposed to give us more money than the ESM.
Thank you. Deputy Derek O'Leary.
One monopoly purchaser, is in a stronger position than a number of willing buyers on the market. But we'll see. This is one of the reasons why we have Goldman Sachs in, to evaluate the full thing and get advice.
Let's move on. We'll make some progress, please.